You are listening to the North American Kings podcast, your traditional masculinity training ground. I'm your host, Glenn Kowalski, founder of North American Kings LLC, a leadership development company based in Cincinnati, Ohio. As we all know, the man brand has taken an absolute beating over the past few decades, and it's our mission to change that. We're going to do that by helping you join the fight to reclaim traditional masculine values. Welcome to headquarters. Training starts now. Welcome back to the training ground, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Glenn Kowalski. We've got a great show planned for you today. It's research packed, and I'm excited to get to it. So let's get started. This show is brought to you by our friends at Naked Armor Razors and Wet Shave Gear. This company supplies everything you may need in order to have a great wet shave. They aren't just here to get your business, they're interested in keeping it. That means coming up with new and innovative products to keep up with the competition. And I've got to say, they've done it. Available today, the new Damascus straight razor is here. For those of you who don't know what Damascus steel is, it was the inspiration for Valyrian steel as described in the Game of Thrones books and shows, with hundreds of folds in the steel. A quote from one of the books, Toad says to Jon Snow, "I heard of a man who had a razor made of Valyrian steel. He cut his head off trying to shave." And indeed, these blades are just that good. This is an exciting product that I personally can't wait to try. It's got an angled set of scales, a hooked tail, and jimps along the front end of the tang, all giving you a superior grip on your blade. For a unique, beautiful, and functional straight razor, try the Damascus Straight Razor or Straight Razor Kit from Naked Armor Razors. Right now, my listeners can get 15% off of anything in their online store by going to nakedarmorrazors.com and entering coupon code KINGS15. Don't wait to start enjoying the highest quality shave you'll ever give yourself. nakedarmorrazors.com. Now, in this episode, we are going to be discussing defense. I've mentioned in almost every show that we've had that we must publicly espouse traditional masculine values when we're out in the real world. Now, we can't accept things in silence. I'm not advocating for starting fights, but we need to be prepared to finish them. Our silence is part of the reason we've gotten here as a group of men. And I'm guilty of it too, as I'll touch on later in the show. Men, individually, we don't usually feel it when people are complaining about other men around us, right? Even though they're talking about you in a general sense, we tend to brush it off. We're designed to do that. It's not intended as a personal dig, despite how those complaints are about things that are fundamental to your being. It's not a big deal, right? And because it's not intended as something personal, we take it right on the armor. We ignore it in order to keep the peace. I understand. Men, you are rocks. Okay, and I described this to one of my brothers during a very chaotic situation before. Totally sober, I said, I feel like a boulder at the bottom of a river. I am the rock and letting all this weird family stuff just batter me, but ultimately flow around me. Now, men, in our silence, we are the stoic boulder. And that there's honor in that, believe me. But our collective silence has cost us something. As the chaos of that river batters us with little effect to us, the boulder, the ground below us is slowly being dragged away. Our foundation is being eroded, and eventually it's not going to be able to support us. We don't yet know what it will be like when the rock finally tumbles. We may get swept away in the tumult, or we may land safely elsewhere. We don't know yet. Our silence allows this process to happen. Now, why would we stay silent? I mentioned that it might be because we just, we don't feel the blows leveled at us. I fought in metal armor before. Armor can take a beating before it actually starts to hurt you physically. If it's going to be over quickly, why wouldn't you just take it on the breastplate rather than risk the ire of your friends, family, and coworkers? I get it. But what if it's because we don't know how to defend ourselves? Who wants to fight someone they haven't prepped for? Weak strategy and losing tactics should be abandoned. We've said that before. But rather, Rather than quit, we need to be regrouping. That's why we're here. This is the training ground. So today, we're going to be discussing the gender wage gap. Now, there are sources out there that can give you a crash course on this. I've found in thousands of coaching situations over my career that if you don't understand why, the facts aren't going to matter much, right? I want to teach you the why, right? So that when you're in battle out there, when you're on your own, out there alone, and you're fighting this, you can pivot and move with the freedom that someone who understands what they're talking about has, right? I don't want you to just be this person that knows the facts and talking points, because you're going to run into a situation that, you haven't quite known the talking point for, and you're going to trip up. I don't want that to happen. So I've seen this pop up time and time again over the past couple of months. It started with Megan Rapinoe a couple of years ago with the U.S. women's soccer team. And since then, women athletes have been coming out over the past few years demanding equal pay or as equal pay as their counterparts in professional sports. Now, we'll get into the sports stuff in a second. The reason I mention it is because these women are prompting women in the real world, like our world, to ask similar questions. And believe it or not, I'm glad they're asking the question. Truly. I've laughed in some of their faces, partly because they wanted to make it personal, but also because the premise that they like to start with is kind of off point. Their starting point is usually based on a lie, one that's usually swallowed eagerly because it supports their feelings rather than the objective facts. They deal in conjecture, abstraction, and feelings. We are going to be discussing evidence today. I've done the research for you, and I'm going to cite those in our episode description so that if you want to look for yourself so you can further understand it, by all means, I want to be that resource for you. So we're also going to look into something that no one's really talking about, the why, the functional why, not the why have this discussion. We're going to be talking about the finer points. Why, when there are pay discrepancies, why do they make sense? Now that's going to be a sticking point for some people. So you're going to have to duck and move pretty quick on this one, right? Our argument here at North American Kings is that when all things are equal, the pay gap is minuscule at best. Okay? In most cases, not at all. When the gap does exist, it exists for very real and very rational reasons that have nothing to do with the employer's view on sex. But that won't be enough, so we're going to look at ways that society can change it. Men, we are solutions providers, correct? How many times have we made that mistake of offering a solution to our wives when all they wanted you to do was listen to them, right? It's time to man up. Let's provide some solutions. That's what we're good for, right? So we have to start by examining why these gaps exist. So let's get going. I saw this a couple of times out there, and I feel that this may bring things into perspective, okay? So soccer is where some of this started. Soccer's popular, but let's be honest. Football, basketball, and baseball are America's sports, all right? So let's look at popular American sports so that we can really bring this home, because this, I think, will actually bring this into perspective. I recently engaged in this conversation. It was over a meme that you guys might have seen over the past couple of months. In it threw up statistics about how much Sue Bird makes versus LeBron James. Now, firstly, as a guy who has never really gotten into the NBA almost at all, I at least know who LeBron James is. I asked one of my employees this, if he had ever heard of Sue Bird, and it turns out he does watch the WNBA for some other reasons. He has friends that have actually coached girls who have made it to the WNBA. So he actually watches as a fan. And according to him, Sue Bird's a Hallmark player. So Thaddeus, thank you for grounding me. And I mean that. Like he provides me some perspective. But he also kind of made the argument for me. Big star in the NBA versus big star in the WNBA. The whole world knows who LeBron James is. And I'm willing to bet that half of it Half of those people hasn't even heard of Sue Bird, despite her competency and skills in the sport. All right. Now, nod to Rachel Bachman of the Wall Street Journal. As of January this year, 2021, there is a new collective bargaining agreement with the WNBA players. That agreement increases the top player's salary in the WNBA to around $500,000. And the average compensation for rookies and veterans will be about $130,000. Right? That's still not as much as the men, but now it's time for some reflection. The WNBA has been operating for around 25 years. The NBA has been operating for much longer. And because of that, the NBA has a huge difference in marketing infrastructure and overall brand recognition. All right, now that may be what's driving some of this, but here's the kicker. The WNBA operates at a loss. Now, there are some amazing clinical articles out there on this particular issue with the WNBA. However, I'm not going to be citing them directly for the same reason. I don't believe some people when they argue with me in person. I don't know who their sources are. They may throw out statistics from one source or another, but who knows? I don't trust their sources. You know, in a lot of cases, again, we've talked about it. Stats can be manipulated, right? And I haven't found many original sources of information on specific revenues, specific costs. I don't know why it's hard to find that information, but at least for me, it has been. So despite that, despite a lot of numbers being thrown around out there, I wanted to go to an actual source view. So how about this? In fairness, I'm going to cite an Associated Press interview in October of 2018 with the NBA commissioner, Adam Silver, as he said of the WNBA, on average, we've lost over $10 million every year we've operated. That's a loss. And that's a lot. So operating at a loss, the players just negotiated more money this year. That doesn't sound like discrimination at all to women, does it? I mean, if things were objectively fair, one, we'd call that charity, but two, if women were treated like men, that business should be shut down. Now, I'm not going to ascribe motive for keeping a cost center out there. In business, we do it all the time. Like there's a cost center and then there's the revenue driver. Like what's the strategic difference? But with the WNBA, again, I'm not going to speculate, but women's soccer presents a similar story. The only caveat there is that women's team is quote unquote outperforming their male counterparts. So why would that be? This business's opinion, based on scientific facts, is that women and men are biologically different. That cannot be refuted. And anybody who tries is only going to prove themselves the fool. All right? That's why, until very, very recently, women's sports were kept entirely separate from men's. And I'm encouraging women out there to advocate for sports leagues to remain that way, separate. A couple of examples. In 1998, the Battle of the Sexes between both Serena and Venus Williams, they decided that they wanted to take on a male challenger. Now, Venus was in the top 10 ranking of all women in tennis, and Serena was in the 20s. They challenged the 203rd ranked player, a German named Karsten Braasch. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He beat them handily after golfing all morning, 0 warm-up. All right, the scores weren't even close. Like, this was a blowout. So Mr. Karsten beat Venus, in the top 10 ranking, being the 203rd ranked player. He beat her one set 6-2 against Venus. And then went and beat Serena 6-1. All right? Men are bigger, faster, stronger. That means competition. That's why the men's soccer team may not be performing in winning trophies or competitions the way the women's team does, but those competitions are going to probably be fiercer. And again, I don't play soccer, so like someone may correct me, that's fine. but I'm willing to bet that the competition's a little bit fiercer. Right? Now, women's U.S. track and field is the exact same. All right? So this isn't not just the NBA or soccer. The men's standards are different. The men's standard for the 100-meter dash right now for the U.S. team is set, the qualifier is set at 1.1 seconds ahead of the women's qualification standard. For the 200-meter dash, it's 2.6 seconds faster to even qualify. And for the 400-meter, it's 6.15 seconds faster. You guys see the difference there? This increases time and time over, and it increases to minutes of difference as the distances climb. Again, in 2016, based on searches that were done, that I did in the actual Olympic databases, in 2016, the top 3 gold, silver, and bronze medalists in the women's 100-meter dash timed in at 10.71 seconds, 10.83 seconds, and 10.86 seconds. All right. For the men, gold, silver, and bronze medals were at 9.81, 9.89, and 9.91 seconds. So the first place woman wouldn't have made the top 10. But let's ask why. Why do women sports not generate as much revenue as men's sports? We just mentioned the physicality. All right. But it's also easy to see when we look at what sports really do. What is their primary function rather than focusing on who's playing them? All right. From a 1989 article by Michael J. Shapiro titled "Representing World Politics, the Sports War Intertext." He said, with the decline of competing shared objects of reverence, sports heroes, and paradigmics and memorable sporting events known throughout the nation, at least to a large percentage of the male populations, provide some of the new cohesive aesthetics with which persons are connected to the social body as a whole. Basically, sports provide us a bond, a shared culture. It's part of our nation, and we can still see some of this today. We see it especially with the top competitors, right? Those crazy sports moments, everybody that kick heard around the world, that tackle seen by everybody, right? Now, Mr. Shapiro continues, the rationalization of self and other provided by the agon represented in the contemporary sports discourse is thus at least as influential as the religious and geopolitical discourses, which are so significant imperative codes broadly dispersed in the population. Now, this points to how necessary sports are. They can be as influential as people's views on religion and on politics. It's a cross-sectional experience that can bind people together who would otherwise disagree on everything. Muslims and Jews, Christians and pagans, U.S. and Russia, U.S. and China. We have these groups have the capacity to set their differences aside for this one thing. That's why there's been such a damaging reaction to the recent politicization of sports. It's usually one of the last refuges that we have for people in these crazy politicized times. Now, because sports serve as a function to bring people together, the psychology suggests that it's more about performance than who's playing. You can see this with kids. Have you ever sat through a t-ball game, and watched it objectively? It's awful. Or kids' soccer. It's brutal. If you're not there for the love of the kid, it's absolute torture. But even more telling than this example of parents loving their kids more than their time, this more telling example is the Legends Football League. And I think everybody actually might know this better by its old name, the Lingerie Football League. Okay? Women in bikinis, cleats, helmets, and shoulder pads playing televised arena football. Short story or short question. Why is this not the most popular sport out there? All right. Take the men demographic. We watch sports. Why was this not played in real football stadiums rather than on short arena leagues? These objectively beautiful women, very attractive, were playing real football. I mean, and they were true athletes. I mean, if you get to watch, they're hitting hard, they're running. Like, this wasn't just for show. And I think the reason is that people view sports as more than just visuals. They want contact. They want something they can actually rally behind. Sports is reminiscent of combat. So in post-war times, given this article that we were just reading, in post-war times, we needed something to bind us together, right? And as religion and even the view of U.S. political discourse sort of dissolve, we still have sports to bring us together, right? So sports is reminiscent of combat. And when our competitors get closer and closer to actual combat, the more spectacular it is. So while extremely attractive women in bikinis tackling each other might be fun in a novel way, it's not going to draw the same crowds that Clay Matthews did when he was sacking people 10 times a game in the NFL. It's not the same thing. We want to see meatheads making contact, hitting home runs, and playing sports, right? We're talking dunking. We're talking tackling. We're talking grand slams in high-stakes situations. That's what people want to see. Proof is in the pudding, okay? The Legends Football League went out of business in 2019. I mean, I can't believe it, right? But if women want the same money that men make, they either need to be as physically competitive and compete at that same level, which is going to be a challenge, or we need to start promoting a sport where the physicality is not as intense. All right? Now, the World Series of Poker attempted this, and it had limited success in the early 2000s. Danica Patrick did this by entering NASCAR, which is an endurance sport, but it caters to a very niche market. Olympic sports carry more weight because we're now nationalizing a sport, but it's still over a limited broadcast time. Like, when else do folks actually watch track and field events or swimming? It doesn't happen a lot. It's going to be hard, but bridging this pay gap in sports is going to require the right sport and the right amount of physical skill from the players. My recommendation is going to be target shooting. I recommend you guys get into this if we're truly interested in the pay gap change in our culture, especially in sports. I think we need to nationalize the U.S. PSA. That's the United States Practical Shooting Association. There's a great physical element to this. They're running actual combat or shooting drills against different targets. It's timed. It's intense. There's a direct combat relevance. There's a physical element to it. And the disparity between male and female competitors is absolutely minuscule. But what about you, though? Women in sports, great. There's some relevance there, but what does it really matter? They live in this other world, right? Like not like most Americans who didn't put in years of single-minded dedication to a particular activity. They're arguing about money we're still not making. So what's really the point? Well, like I mentioned before, women are bringing this up more and more in our local lives because these conversations are happening nationally. Unfortunately, there's a lot more gray area to be had locally. But knowing how to discuss this will make these interactions go better while still defending the value that you've brought forth for you and your family. Their starting point, women certainly make less than men in most careers, in every position, and it's because you are a man. It has nothing to do with them. And now our starting point is that women sometimes make less than men, and in large part due to the choices that they make and due to two distinct biological factors. For us, the men who supposedly have all the advantage, well, why would it matter whether we engage in this front? Well, like I mentioned before, they are going to use this as a solvent. That solvent is meant to break down the bonds between men and between us and our individual purposes. I've seen the argument made that because women are supposedly making less for the exact same work, that everything that men do in order to get ahead is actually worth a lot less. It's not what we're making. It's worth nothing. We've gotten ahead just because of what we are. Moreover, they're trying to devalue the ability that you have to provide. They should be able to provide as much as you do or as capably as you do. It goes back to individual autonomy. They want to make this about your masculinity, not about the work that they do. It's the system. The system was not designed to accommodate women. I've heard that said 1,000 times. It's not about the hard work, the long hours, and the successes that you made happen that make you worth X amount. It's just because you're a guy. Now, unfortunately for anyone making this argument, I know exactly what I'm worth from the job market. I've spent years doing an extreme amount of work in order to get that. I've unfortunately seen it with women close to me, even pitching this show to friends. One of my buddy's wives said very casually, your show might get the wrong kind of attention. I mean, there are men out there right now doing exactly what I do, making more than me. What would you say to that? Now, this conversation happened in my buddy's house, and it was it's my friend's wife, and I wasn't meaning to ruin her morning and then just leave. Like, that would be rude, right? I didn't want to drop that bomb on my friend, piss off his wife, and then leave him to deal with that. Now, my first thought, outside of internally acknowledging my own cowardice, because that's what it was, my first question was, how do you know? Right? Like, how would she have any clue that there's another guy out there doing the exact same job with her exact same experience, with her exact same hours put in, with her exact same skill that makes more than her just for the heck of it? She really doesn't know. So she would not have an answer to that. She couldn't. Her position is subjectively paid, and I'll touch on that in a minute. Follow your gut, gentlemen, in these situations. Don't accept any of that at face value. If you choose to engage in this front, and that's a 50-50 situation, I get it. But if you do decide to engage in that and your gut tells you they're talking about something they have no way of confirming, say it. Believe me, that conversation will end pretty quickly. And part of this is because of the golden rule of business, right? Never tell anyone what you make. If this is the first time you're hearing this, congratulations, you learned it here. But this is not meant to keep people in the dark. It's the golden rule because it keeps the peace. I recently had this experience at work. We had a guy with some experience in the field that he got hired in, right? Turns out he can't keep up or learn the actual standard that we set at our business. We tripled his actual training time, and he still wasn't getting it. So we changed his job. We changed it to something lower. And he was hired at a particular pay rate, slightly higher than the job that he's currently doing. And I got to tell you, it wasn't working out. He was hired at a particular pay rate, right? And it's not currently what for the job he's doing. Great, dude. Keep it to yourself. But no, he decides to start running his mouth off to every other employee for the job that he's currently doing, telling them that he's making a lot more than they are. Now, my first thought with this was that he should have lost his pay immediately. There's not that's not how the decision makers decided they wanted to play this, and that's fine. But now we've got an employee relations issue. What was the source of their animus? He's a decent guy, and I don't see him perform too often. He doesn't report to me. The other employees, however, they feel that they're worth more, and I understand that. Or the other flip side to that coin is that they feel that they work harder than he does doing actually the exact same work. And we work, hourly workers, their wages are effectively set. No one usually makes more than another unless they have qualified at a higher skill level. Everyone makes the same amount for the same job. Hence, my opinion about his pay needing to be permanently dropped, having washed out of his first job. Now, when hourly workers are involved, again, their pay is generally the same. A man or woman working in fast food, at the present, they don't really have any real difference of skill outside of maybe a little bit of work experience. The higher up the ladder you go, the more soft items you bring to the table, and that adds a dimension of subjectivity to what you're getting paid. Now, I just had this out with someone who claimed to have special knowledge on this subject because she took a class on economics and gender. Ooh. Great. I work with stats too. I've said it before on this show. Stats can and do get manipulated. Never trust stats at face value. I've said it before. I'm going to continue to say it time and time again. I trust raw stats without any junk in it. Know how they're calculated. Know what they can tell you. See how they relate to each other. Do it yourself if you'd like to. I personally never trust a class whose sole purpose is to show you how to manipulate stats. Believe me, that's why I got out of economics. Those numbers don't necessarily work out the right way, or you can make them say certain things. Worse yet, never trust a class that will show you pre-manipulated information, present it to you as fact, and hope that you can go out there and just parrot it off. Well, great. Now you're a puppet. Officially. Congratulations. So let's look at raw numbers. I did the research for you, okay? We don't have any slaves in this country, despite what people want to tell you. That means if you are doing work, you get to choose the work that you do. That's a great thing in this country. Your wage is what you agree that work is worth. If the pay is too low, then don't do the job. You don't have to. On the flip side, if your circumstances require that you generate money immediately, well, then guess what? Your circumstances are worth that much, not your work. Please understand that. If for some reason I absolutely needed to make $20 tomorrow, well, I don't get paid until Friday. So if I absolutely had to have cash and someone said, hey, I'll give you $20, but you got to do this crazy thing. You got to fix my car or clean my house. Well, that work is usually worth more, but do I need the $20? Yeah. So guess what? I'm fixing a car or I'm cleaning a house. My circumstances, the need that I have for that money outweighs the actual work that's necessary. And if it's not, then it's not. Some people decide to go hungry. That's totally up to them. Right? But according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2019, women overwhelmingly chose careers in service, office administration and support, and professional and related occupations. The numbers skewed slightly towards women, but were roughly equal in management and sales occupations. Men, on the other hand, overwhelmingly dominated the natural resources and production, transport, and material moving occupations. We are biologically different. We went over that in the first segment here. And we can see that that's driving us towards different fields, different professions. Women naturally are more nurturing and political than the two sexes. And they tend towards fields that coordinate well with those natural skills. Women gravitate towards being teachers, towards service, towards being nurses. They also do like being managers. So and they like to build those relationships. We've talked about several of those differences here on the show. Now, over the centuries, this physical difference is also why men have gravitated towards physical labor. We are good at it. Men are naturally bold, ambitious risk takers. That leads us to take on dangerous and thusly more lucrative fields. It also leads us to do dangerous things in our pastimes, right? Then in 2019, the most deadly jobs as a percentage of 100,000, or actually I think it's 100 million full-time workers, were fishers, logging workers, aircraft pilots and flight engineers, roofers, helpers in construction trades, refuse and recycling collectors, sales and truck drivers, structural iron and steel workers, farmers and ranchers, and grounds and maintenance. And for those of you who can see me right now, you guys can actually see that pop up here on this screenshot. But this isn't quite as stark as my example from earlier in the series. I've never met a female bouncer. Right? I have met women in these fields. They're few and far between. But these jobs objectively do not attract women for a litany of reasons. Although, again, I've met women in these fields. It's good for them. They chose fields that are going to pay more because of the inherent risk to them. As these numbers shift towards total number of fatal work injuries, you can see the numbers flip and drive towards the more quote-unquote manly options, the manly jobs. There's a reason for that. Now, this next one is from the U.S. Census Bureau, not some class on feminine studies. This is the government, which generally is driving the wedge between men and women, or at least they're helping out. So these numbers should suffice for their purposes. From the U.S. Census Bureau, in STEM fields, that's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. In STEM fields, which generally equalize the physicality of jobs, women are vastly underrepresented. Why? Because these fields generally require a lack of emotion. Men are designed to think more logically, where women thrive in fields that require emotional competence. They are just better at emotional competency than men are. So women make up 48% of the U.S. workforce. When it comes to STEM fields, they make up 27% of those employees, which is an actual jump. That's an improvement on the years prior. Now, here's the kicker. When women are engaged in STEM fields, they make the same or slightly less than men. Now, why would that be? Now, when men make up such a high percentage of the workforce, median incomes need to rise, right? And we all remember that from class when we were kids, right? You line up every single item or a number that you get, and then you pick one that's geographically in the middle. You count up 20 if you've got 40, and then you count down 20 and you get to the middle, right? Now, averaging generally did this. We use median, for those of you who don't know. We use the median because that really smooths things out if there's like crazy outliers. Someone's making 200 billion, which I know is a fake number with regards to this study. But if somebody's making a crazy amount, the average is going to be way, way, way up there. The median levels everything out and picks the one that's geographically in the center. But having a bigger number of men in the pool strategically, I mean, it's just a statistical fact, will bring that number up, especially when women are underrepresented. Again, using the average or median levels things a bit, but it's statistically relevant to acknowledge this mathematical fact that when there are more men capable of making or available to make that top wage compared to the number of women that do, our median income is going to go up. Now, in this particular U.S. Census study fact sheet, of the 119 jobs, 31 weren't statistically relevant enough, or they weren't different enough to actually give us a ratio. Okay. Now these fields, materials engineers, mechanical engineers, mining and geological engineers, including mining safety engineers, nuclear engineers, and petroleum engineers, women made more than men. And that's according to the U.S. Census Bureau. The rest, the 83 professions covered, there are some discrepancies. It's not much, but there are discrepancies. And none of these fields mentioned in the survey make arbitrary wages like factory workers. That means these positions are all subjective, and that means it's reasoned based on experience, work history, total number of hours worked, and negotiation. Let's break this down. Negotiation is a huge factor in jobs hired for. Okay, it's something that people, especially in American culture, we're not trained to do this often. I've mentioned it time and time again, know your worth. If you plan on climbing, you're ambitious, take these opportunities now to expand your careers and get what you're worth early. Right? You negotiate early, and every job thereafter will pay at a higher amount. I mentioned some positions have arbitrary wages, some do not. And if you have the opportunity to do this, negotiate. This does two things. It will get you potentially more money in either tangibles like money or higher bonus, or you'll be paid more in intangibles like more time off, flexible hours, or work allowances. Now, if you accept the first offer, there will be psychologically some buyer's remorse on both sides. You'll say, hey, I could have gotten more money by asking for it, and they'll feel that they could have gotten you for less. Or, hey, he values himself at this amount. We valued him maybe a little bit higher. Did I settle for something I shouldn't have? And you don't want that. No one wants that on the first day of the job, right? Now, men are better negotiators than women in most cases. Now, this is not my opinion. From a December 2020 article from negotiation experts, 57% of men negotiate their salaries, where 7% of women do. As a result, men make on average 7.6% more than women do starting out. And like I mentioned, very first job, I negotiate a higher salary. Every subsequent job after that is going to be based on that first salary. Or they'll offer you that. And they'll offer you that knowing that, well, we really want this guy, or we really want this person. They won't take the job unless they're making at least what they're taking in now. Let's give them a little bit of a bump. It happens all the time. Now, men, according to this study, use highly intensive language, and women tend not to. When women do this, though, they are more effective as well. So this isn't something that only men can pull off. Right? Now, why is the rate that women negotiate so low? You know, we've stated before, women are political creatures. Now, that stereotype that they value relationship building rather than destruction, that's based on something. And aside from that, you know, again, the stereotype that women are more accommodating. Let's focus more on the objective negotiation difference. We've got highly intensive language that women tend not to use. Women also tend to employ language that has fluff in it. And it's scientifically proven that concise and direct language is taken more seriously. The statement, "this is far more impactful than "I think this is." Right? Same cadence, same tempo. Those are perceived different. Women prove to do this, and that perception is that language is less forceful. Women are better at reading emotions, and they tend, because of that, they don't make these same mistakes that men do in negotiation. But it's proving to be less valuable than the actual will to jump in and do it. Now, beyond negotiation, there's also hours worked that influence how much men take home. Based on a Bureau of Labor Statistics data sheet, men worked a total of 75,380,000 hours in 2020. Women worked a total of 65,484,000 hours. Now, men, on average, worked an average of 40 hours per week, where women averaged about 36. Women edged slightly on men in hours worked while in management functions, but men cleaned house with regards to hours worked in other related fields. Now, couple this study again from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that show that a percentage of wages earned, or of the jobs that do, the highest amount of overtime paid as a percentage of actual cash earned were production jobs, management jobs, business and financials, architecture and engineering, maintenance, entertainment, media, transportation, and construction. The majority of those jobs I just mentioned are dominated by men. They are compensated based on output of hours worked and the structure of the business. It's output and hours put in. That's not discriminatory, and it's not a function of the business, right? It's job and output. The specifics can be found on the fact sheet that I'll provide in the episode description. But why don't women choose to work in these fields? Is it because they're not suited for them? Well, in some cases, sure. Women can work in construction, but they will be at a physical disadvantage. Do they work, around, do they even want to work around some, and I mean some, of the guys that work construction jobs? Sometimes the answer is no. But on top of that, work history has a lot to do with this discussion, and this is something that gets overlooked a lot. Now, feminists will point to working mothers needing to pump while they're at work, specifically post-childbirth. Men, here's a quick rundown on breastfeeding that I was not aware of before my wife had my kids. Okay, moms need, and I mean need, to pump milk out, or else their breasts will swell and it's going to feel like they're going to pop. It's a very painful thing for women to go through if they don't. And if you're going on a road trip for an extended amount of time, get a manual pump. You will thank me later. It is a biological necessity for them to get the milk out. Okay, now women who are breastfeeding need to do this at length, at least twice a day during a normal work day in order to maintain production output. The less they pump or feed, the less milk they'll produce for their kids. The women will call this their supply. All right, now they need to maintain this pace, or they'll stop producing later on, and the kid won't have breast milk from mom, and they'll need to switch to formula, or they'll need to purchase breast milk through an exchange. All right, now understanding this will help you either manage your employees or help you support your significant other. All right, now pumping is painful. It's not at all attractive. Okay, that's my opinion, but I believe you guys can take that to the bank. Okay, guys, do not get excited. This is real work that you're doing. Okay, and I mean that, and you can prove that because women burn more calories breastfeeding and pumping than you probably will ever at the gym. Okay, if your wife or girlfriend wants to shed baby weight, have her pump or breastfeed. Breast milk is very fatty, and they're producing it. It needs to come from somewhere. All right, pounds will melt off of your girl. All right, now workplaces need to provide this place for women to do this by law. All right, it's just like not being able to discriminate against women on wage. Right, it's illegal to do so by law. All right, and discriminating them against them based on them having to pump is also illegal. Right, but I've worked for several big companies and several small ones. Not one has ever complained or had a problem with this. Okay, I've never run into it. I've set up these rooms myself. Pumping usually takes around 30 minutes. I've usually worked it out where employees will have their 20-minute break extended to about 40 so that they can eat, they can do whatever they need to do, and they can pump. Pumping doesn't take a lot of work, but is a stationary exercise. They sit down and they do this and they can't really move. All right, so an extended break has worked for employees, both salaried and hourly. Right now, women don't lose anything in this process, like feminists will want to tell you. All right, women don't get discriminated against because they get pregnant. When women do, they get maternity leave or FMLA, which protects their jobs. FMLA doesn't pay, so sometimes women will actually, work out their maternity leave and then they'll go right back to work. All right, but they're not losing out on relationship building, or they're not losing out on meetings and decision processes. They're not losing that experience because salaried women choose when they do this. They choose when they pump, right? They get on a little bit of a schedule, and the important meetings they'll go to and they'll pump otherwise. All right. Women who tell you otherwise have either not had kids or they're not working a real job. Right? Take that to the bank. Take solace in that. And understand this process. It's biological. Women will do this. My wife sat, and again, that road trip example, she sat in a car for 8 hours. Our first time we thought we could make it. She was in pain when we got to our destination. Right? We got a manual pump right after that. But I'm telling you, women can go for, there is some flexibility within that schedule. They can make that important meeting. right? So women don't lose anything in this process. However, not all women go back to work right after their maternity leave. According to a study conducted by LinkedIn and Census-Wide, reported by Ann Steich from Business, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, from Biz Women Journal, 49% of women take an extended maternity leave. 75% of the women who continued working wished that they didn't. So let's just put those numbers together. That's 86.5% of women who have children do not want to work after everything's said and done. And on average, when women take time off, it's usually around 2 years. That's pretty significant. FMLA doesn't protect that job. In that situation, it's forfeited. In many cases, women do this for every child that they've had, effectively keeping them out of the workforce during their prime. And for those women who want to be home or who are just coming back from work after having kids, are they top performers? In some cases, sure. Like I'm not knocking them, but they very well might be. But split responsibilities of wanting to be home with their children and wanting a successful career. Parents need to work together in order to maintain or get ahead in either environment. If there's a lack of focus, most people are simply going to coast until their kids get older and they're more self-sufficient. And that's okay. I said as much during my last job interview. They asked why I worked so many companies, and my job was as the primary breadwinner, and in some cases sole provider. My job was to grind through the first several years of my career. That was the job. My job was to advance as high as I could, as early as I could, because at some point we knew we wanted a family, and even me trying to be an active parent at home, at some point I knew I was going to coast. Right? There was a real benefit to each move, more responsibility, more experience managing, more money on the table for both salary and like budget at work to be responsible for. But they were able to respect it when I said I want to settle somewhere and provide some stability and really dig in and set down some roots. Now, this forfeiture is what affects women the most. Of all the factors that we're talking about. In the middle of their prime earning years, many women have a biological need to have kids and to take that break. This speaks to the biology of this, not the patriarchy. Women's bodies at maximum need 4 weeks, barring major surgery like a C-section, in order to recover. All right? Women who will say that they have to choose between having children and having a career. That's BS, and they know it. They are choosing en masse to take care of children. What are we really going to do? Like, what was your job really going to be? The CEO? Very few people have that drive and get that high, right? It's not going to be me. I'm never going to get there, right? And understanding that will put some perspective into your lives. Was your child really the deciding factor between that CEO and your desk job? Probably not, right? What's really more important? If women wanted their career so badly and taking off the minimum amount of time their body needs to recover before jumping back on the bandwagon, I mean, if the minimum time was too short, then their argument isn't with the system, it's with fundamental biology. And if that's your sticking point, then you do need to ask yourself whether or not you want a baby or a career. And to that person, I really hope you pick your career, because kids are work, and I doubt you have the stones for it. Like, they take a lot of work, and they'll require more sacrifice than you seem willing to give. Now, it's not just my opinion. That's a biological fact. Kids will take it out of you. Now, I've applauded stay-at-home parents on this show because it is a job. However, that job doesn't translate back to the working world in a direct way. I've hired dozens of people over my career, and I will tell you, a 2 or 5 year work history gap is significant. Current practices need to be retaught, even to someone who's returning back to the field they left. Endurance for the job changes. right? Like, are you going to be able to stand for 10 hours and and work on this machine? Or are you going to be cool making a salary and staying late and flexing your hours if you need to, if things get crazy and we've got a presentation to give to someone important last minute? These things happen, right? And that gap in training and endurance, that's worth a tangible amount because they carry an added risk to even hiring someone back. A mom of 3 who hasn't worked in an industry for the past 4 years, pitted against a man of equal age, work experience, who just completed a few projects that this mom has had under her belt a while ago, but is looking to continue that direct momentum, his perceived risk is a lot lower, right? Because he's currently doing the job. He's proving he can currently do it. And not having that risk is going to be worth something. Now, whether or not the mom or dad stays home, that's also a choice. I've heard many women say women have to be the ones to go home. No, they don't. I've taken more personal days than my wife has in my career because my job offered me more flexibility to do so. However, both of us knew that since I make significantly more money than my wife did, her job was the one we risk, especially if attendance was starting to get stretched. I've seen couples duke it out. Unfortunately, for those who don't know, if kids even hint that they're sick, and this is prior to COVID, but my sons like suck their thumbs real bad or like chewed on their fingers, so they got like little pimples or they just get that around their faces sometimes. Well, that looks like hand, foot, mouth, or something like that. I forget, but it's something very ridiculous like that. That's the name of this virus. Well, they're not doctors, so when they even think your kid's got that, you get a phone call, regardless if you're at work or not. And I've seen couples duke it out on the work floor, trying to decide which one is going to take the attendance point so that they can go get their kids from daycare and go home. I know stay-at-home dads too, because mom just makes more. These are choices, right? And that's what's all these personal choices create the gender gap when it is actually a thing. It's not arbitrary and it's not discriminatory. There are things that you can do to make things better, right? As a society, childcare costs can go down and we can provide work flexibility, sure. But those things will only make it easier for career-oriented women to have it both ways. And we should provide those things, sure. But as we discussed, those won't help that same woman who decides to take a few years off raising kids or negotiate their salaries. If they decide not to do either of those things, boom, gap, 7.6%. Like, these are real numbers. So women could choose to work in fields that are just as dangerous or physically hard as men. Again, they choose not to. These are not discriminatory practices. These are jobs that need to be done. The best advice I can give is to communicate with your significant other. My wife and I have fought hard over this. My wife is a stay-at-home mother. She did not intend to be. I did not force her to do this. She wrestled with her desire for purpose outside of the home to not have her identity absorbed by the children. When she did work and effectively earned maybe a little bit more than we were paying in daycare costs, she felt horrible because someone else was raising our kids. I was always making more than my wife was. So, from the moment we met, and my job was kind of set. I have to earn. She got a choice in that, and she felt awful for years while our children were at daycare. Now we moved to the Cincinnati area. She chooses to stay home because she did not want that experience, and then complained that she didn't have a purpose that she wanted to, and she wanted to go back to work. I'm like, at that point, stay-at-home parents need to find their purpose in their kids, in God, something, in order to stay sane. It's not an easy thing to do, being on all the time. I understand. Our arguments were sometimes over my feelings as much as hers because of my frustration and not being able to provide her the perfect situation where she could stay at home with the kids and then work and have some sort of purpose. Now, ultimately, it's been on her to find it, and it's been my job to help. But through everything, we've talked. Arguments are healthy sometimes. They really are. Make sure that you do this for each other. Whoever stays at home, make sure that it works for the family. And it's the whole situation that you're keeping in context, not just the money. You know, if you're deciding whether or not to have children, think long and hard about what you're getting into. If you happen to get to this situation accidentally and you can't hack it, put your child up for adoption. Right? One of my coworkers brought that up not too long ago. You know, people plan on having kids. Okay, they make all these decisions. Well, what if they didn't? Well, they choose to keep the child, and I'm glad for that. I really am. Right? But that's a choice. You've decided to step into the gauntlet, and I applaud you for it. But there is, again, you're choosing the child over your career in some cases. Okay, now if you happen to get here accidentally, again, I'm not knocking you. Your career making widgets or typing on a computer will pale in comparison to the life you're going to be providing these kids. It's not a choice at all, really. My wife is blessed to stay at home with her boys. I miss a lot going to a factory every day. Believe me, you will be more fulfilled at home. I hope this helped everyone. Keep your hands up. Be able to defend yourself. When someone is complaining about their personal situation, again, we want to understand that. You know, I'm not telling you to knock that person. If they don't feel that they're being paid what they're worth, I get it. If someone is complaining that men are making more arbitrarily, just be sure to remind them that they can control what they can control. There are things they can do. Take on more projects. Right? They can work extra hours. They can make those things work if that's their goal. But make sure that they do not give in to the victim mentality, or they will be stuck there complaining about something they have no intent on changing. That's our show, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this show, please give us a 5-star review and subscribe for free. We're on Apple Podcasts, Rumble, YouTube, and wherever else you get your content. Good luck out there.